The room was filled with smoke. It was a heavy, oily smoke, and it hung in the air like a fog, turning the sunlight into an orange glow. In the center of the room, where the smoke was thickest, stood a large glass-sided aquarium. The aquarium had a solid metal door which was locked from the inside. The lock was made of tempered steel, and it was very strong. The two guards standing beside the door were wearing heavy canvas gloves. They were smoking heavily too. In front of the aquarium, a young girl sat on a stool, her legs dangling over the edge. She was quite naked, and she had a leather collar around her neck. There was a ring in the collar, and held a heavy steel ball which was attached to a chain around her neck. The chain was secured to the wall by a steel bracket. The girl was weeping. One guard went to the girl, and he put a cigarette in her mouth. She sucked at the cigarette greedily, then she turned to him. "Please," she begged. "Please let me out." The guard shrugged his shoulders. He was unimpressed by the girl's plea, but he did take the cigarette out of her mouth. Then he lit it for her, and he put it back in her mouth. He sat down beside her, and he lit a cigarette for himself. "Let me out," the girl begged again. "Let me go." "Shut up," the guard replied, and he spat a thick stream of tobacco juice into the aquarium. "Just sit there and take it." The girl screamed with terror, and she began to cry again. The guard laughed at her, and he leaned back in his chair. "You'll get used to it," he said. He took another puff at his cigarette, and he looked at the girl's breasts. They were big and firm and round, and the nipples were dark red and very hard. The girl was trying to cover her breasts with her arms, but the chain around her neck kept her arms down. "You'll get used to it," the guard repeated. Suddenly the door in the aquarium opened, and a man stepped inside. He wore white trousers, white shoes, and a white coat with many pockets. The coat had brass buttons down the front. The man's face was round and fat, and his nose was puffy and shiny. He was smoking a pipe, and his mustache was very thick and curly. "What is this?" he demanded, and he looked around the room. The guard with the girl on the stool got to his feet. "Mr. Einstein," he said. Einstein smiled at him. "You are the guard," he said. "Yes." Einstein walked slowly toward the aquarium. The man with him followed, and he stopped at the door and looked at the girl. He smiled at her. Then he took a dollar bill out of his wallet and dropped it into her lap. Einstein was standing beside the girl. "Do you know who I am?" he asked her. The girl shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I am Albert Einstein," Einstein said. "I am the greatest scientist in the world." He turned to the man with him. "This is Mr. Morgan," he said. "He is my business manager." "Yes," Morgan said. Einstein walked toward the aquarium, and he looked into the tank. It was a large tank, and the water was cloudy and dirty looking. It smelled strongly of urine. There was a cement floor in front of the tank, and it was covered with newspapers and pieces of clothing and soiled bandages. There was a little pile of trash in one corner of the room, and there was a drain in another corner, but otherwise the place was clean. Einstein went back to Morgan. "Mr. Morgan," he said, "I want you to leave us alone for a few minutes." "Yes." Einstein turned to the man with him. "Mr. Morgan has just given me $200,000 to build an atomic bomb," he said. Morgan looked surprised. "Yes," he said. "An atomic bomb," Einstein repeated. "Mr. Morgan has given me this money because he wants me to build an atomic bomb for him." Einstein turned to the guard who was watching him. "Mr. Bickford," he said, "would you please show Mr. Morgan out?" Bickford got to his feet and walked out of the room. Then he went downstairs and he stood outside the door with his hand on the knob. Morgan smiled at Einstein, and he nodded at Bickford. "Well," he said, "shall we go?" "Yes," Einstein said. He picked up a handful of newspapers from the floor. "Do you know what this is?" he asked Morgan. Morgan shook his head, but he was smiling. "No." "It is garbage," Einstein said. "All of it is garbage, and you wanted me to build you an atomic bomb." "I have my reasons," Morgan said, "but that doesn't concern you." Einstein laughed at him. "Do you think that I would work for you without a penny?" he demanded. "Do you think that I would work for you for only $200,000? He threw the newspapers into the aquarium. "I don't care about your money," he shouted at Morgan. "I don't need your money." Then he turned to Bickford and he waved his hand at the man. "And as for you," Einstein said, "if you think that you can fool me, you are very much mistaken." Bickford grabbed for Einstein's arm, but Einstein pulled away from him. "Get out of here," Einstein shouted at him. Morgan got to his feet and he put a hand on Bickford's shoulder. "That is enough," he said to Einstein. Einstein shrugged off Morgan's hand and he shook his finger under Bickford's nose. "You're no better than this trash," he told him. "You are not fit to clean up after this pig." Bickford ran out of the room and down the stairs. Then he stood at the door and watched as Einstein picked up a newspaper and threw it into the aquarium. The newspaper landed on top of a pile of newspapers and magazines. Einstein looked at Bigfoot and smiled at him. "I want you to leave us alone," he said. "I want you to leave us alone for a few minutes." Bigfoot walked away from the door and he waited for a minute or two in the hall until Einstein had finished cleaning out the aquarium. Then he walked back into the room and he looked at Einstein again. "Well?" Einstein asked him. "I came to get my money," Bigfoot said, "and I am going to have it." Einstein shrugged his shoulders. "It is not here," he said. Bigfoot laughed at him. "Where is it?" Einstein picked up another newspaper and he threw it into the aquarium. "In my office," he said. "I am going there now to get it." "Wait here," Bigfoot said. He got to his feet and he left the room. He walked quickly down the hall and into another room. There was a desk in that room, but there was no one behind the desk. Bigfoot opened the drawers of the desk and he looked inside them. They were empty. Bigfoot turned around and he saw Einstein standing in the doorway with an omelette of newspapers in his hand. He dropped the papers on the floor. Then he walked quickly out of the room and he went downstairs and he left the building without looking back at Einstein again. Einstein went to his office and he locked the door behind him. Then he took the key out of the lock and he put it in his pocket. He walked over to his desk and he sat down in his chair. He leaned back in the chair and he put his feet up on his desk. Then he lit another cigarette, but he didn't smoke it. He just held it in his mouth and let it burn there. Then he took it out of his mouth and dropped it into an ashtray. Then he leaned over and opened his desk drawer. He took out the money which Morgan had given him. Then he counted it, one bill at a time, until there were exactly $200,000. He put the money in his wallet. Then he took his feet down from the desk and he stood up and he went into his private bathroom and he took a shower. Then he got dressed again and he went out into the hallway and he walked down the stairs and he walked out of the building. Bigfoot drove away in his car and he stopped for a red light in front of the building. Then he turned around and he saw Einstein standing on the curb. Einstein was holding a newspaper in his hands and he was smiling at Bigfoot through the open window on the driver's side of the car. Bigfoot sat still for a moment. Then he turned his car around in a U-turn and he drove back to the apartment building where he lived. When he got home, Bigfoot went into his living room and he poured himself a drink. Then he went into his bedroom and he lay down on his bed and he waited for his wife to come home from work.